and welcome back to my channel True Crime and Trials, where I discuss true crime and trials. My name's Lindsay and I am on the last two videos for the Durst trial for this week. As I said in the previous video, Bob was hospitalised Thursday. Still haven't heard anything about that. Even Mr. Lewin argued that it could be, just Bob putting on an act because he has threatened to do that before, but the judge put his trust in the jail hospital and just said, well, they know what they're doing. We'll see what transpires over the weekend if he finds anything. So I'll carry on with these two videos and then we'll caught up and see what happens on Monday. So next up is Mella Kaufman, and she's a stepdaughter of Susan. And Mr. Lewin shows a picture of Mella with Susan when she was probably about 13 years old. And then they show a picture of Susan with Mella's father, Paul. Mella met Susan when she was 11, and Mella realised within 6 to 8 months that Susan would remain a part of her life. And Susan even said to her that she would never disappoint her or abandon her like her other parents did. So they show another picture of Mella with her father and Susan. Growing up, Susan would do homework with her. They would sit and talk endlessly. They would go out to dinner, do yoga, read books, watch movies. Susan would involve Mella in her work and they would run errands together. From the age of 11 up until she went to college and beyond, they were inseparable. But Mella explains it did get to the point where she did feel controlled. This started when she was around 16, but Susan was 100% committed to Mella, and Mella felt extremely loved. And it was Susan that was with her more than her father. Susan was her only parent. When Susan and Paul split up, Mella went to live with Susan while Paul stayed in New York, and Mella didn't see her father Paul much after that. And now the state shows a picture of Susan with Mella and her brother Sereb. When asked about Susan's personality, she wouldn't say it was all positive and has memories of the negative. The best traits were that she had an unbelievable awareness for the value of human connection and a deep depth of love for the relationships she had. She was also very bright, entertaining, and very supportive. Susan was very determined and said, "Screw your point to the sticking point." The negative traits were she was very manipulative, extremely fearful and controlling, and was always able to control her emotions, and was prone to crashing emotionally. Her worst quality was that she was incredibly vindictive to the point it was disturbing to Mella. In any given situation, Susan had to have 100% control. There was no room for anyone else to have a voice in anything Susan was involved in. If anyone had a problem, Susan would be 100% committed to try to fix it. With regards to Susan's manipulation, Mella feels that it was part of survival for Susan, and that could extend to a parking attendant, to Mella's teacher, to her friends and work, and she was manipulative with most of the world but didn't with Mella. Susan was also one of the most loyal people she knew, and loyalty come first. I mean, it all sounds very familiar from what everyone else has said about Susan. Mella's brother actually got into trouble at work stealing credit cards, and Susan was completely dedicated on helping him and getting his record expunged, which she did. Susan would never hesitate to help someone who was in trouble that was close to her. So they now show another picture of Susan, and honestly it's quite nice to see some different pictures of Susan, because so far we've just seen the same ones over and over. So to see Susan in different situations, it's been quite nice to see. And they show another picture of Susan with one of her dogs, which is Lulu, and Susan adored her dogs. And Mella explains there's no way a stranger could have got in the house with the dogs because they would have gone crazy. Pictures are now being shown of Susan when she was a child with her father and her mother, and there's one with just Susan of her father, which is really nice, and all these photos were on Susan's wall at home. Just before Susan died, Susan had cut off contact with Mella because while she was in college, she decided to contact her biological sister. Susan didn't like this, and Susan was outraged and ended their relationship. Susan ended up doing what she does best and tried to manipulate Mella by saying she was no longer her mother. Mella hadn't spoken to her for about a year and a half before she died, so that must have been so hard for Mella when Susan died, having, with things being as they were between her and Susan. It's just sad. Mella knew Bob and Susan would talk. Mella met Bob when he would come to visit. Mella felt like she knew Bob because she had heard so much about him from Susan. He was an important part of Susan's life. Susan told her that he was her best friend and he was like family. She would light up when she talked about him. Mella knew about Kathy from Susan. Susan had a conversation with Mella when she was possibly 13 years old and told her that about Bob, whose wife Kathy had disappeared, and how she had been his alibi and had made a phone call for him, so it wasn't suspicious. But she left it on a cliffhanger where Mella was wondering if he did it, and Susan smirked and said, "I don't know, what do you think?" kind of thing. But Mella says Susan knew how to make stories interesting. Mella felt that Susan heavily implied that Bob was involved in Kathy's disappearance. When Susan was murdered, Mella was not in a place to think or connect Bob with her murder. So again, is it Susan telling the truth or Susan embellishing and making these stories way more interesting than they actually are? So the cross-examination, Mr. Chesnoff starts off by calling Mella out on what she said in previous interviews, that the memories she has from when she was 13 to 14 years old were foggy, whereas she didn't actually say that on the direct examination. So, bit of a bombshell here, and Mella's brother actually worked for Bob after Susan's death. Mella stopped talking to her brother because he worked for Bob. When the police initially spoke to Mella in 2001, she didn't tell them about what Susan had told her. It wasn't until 2016, 15 years later, Mella speaks to Mr. Lewin and tells him. She was just so traumatised and unable to talk about the past until now, and has been able to process it. She's been through a lot of therapy. Sounds like maybe a bit of PTSD from the trauma with her father, her mother, then with everything she went through with Susan. She did love her, but there was a lot more to it than that. Bob had sent Susan 2 checks for $50,000 as a gift. So when Mella's dad called her about Susan being dead, he actually said, "Ding dong, the wicked witch is dead." And at which point Mella hung up on him and continued to not have anything to do with him. Susan would put down Mella's siblings to keep Mella away from them and keep Mella with her. So she was extremely, again, controlling and possessive. Mella did tell the police that Susan lied about everything. So what can you actually make of what Susan's telling all these people? All these people believe everything she's saying, yet on the flip side, she's a liar and she embellishes. And Mella also told police that there were situations where Susan would open the door to people she didn't know. So you get to a point where you think, yeah, we know who Susan is. She definitely wouldn't open the door, and then a spanner gets thrown in and she would actually open the door. So Mella made a statement saying that Bob was just one of the many people who could have pissed Susan off, and that Susan had the ability to make a lot of enemies. So today, during the direct examination, nor in any interviews, has Mella ever said that Susan told her she called the dean, but now she's saying Susan did tell her. Mella explains that she said something in a vague sense, in more vague terms, that Susan made a call that either helped the school or employment related to the medical school, not to suspect Kathleen's missing. So she vaguely remembers something about a phone call being made to a school to help not put any suspicions onto Kathy being missing. But again, Mella never told anyone this until she spoke to Mr. Lewin. So redirect. So quite rightly, the state are covering why Mella didn't initially tell anyone about what Susan had told her. And back in 2001, Mella didn't even think about Bob being connected in any way. So that conversation wouldn't have even been of any importance to her. And she also wasn't even questioned about Bob. Next, in 2013, when she spoke to one of the producers of The Jinx, and she can't remember what she spoke to them about, so Mella has shown a transcript of what she said, and she did tell them. Now in 2015 with a detective, she doesn't remember what she said then either, so she's shown a transcript, and she told him also. So back at the defence saying she never said anything until she was interviewed in 2016, she actually did say something all along. And as for Mr. Lewin, he asked, more probative questions than anyone else did. So despite the defence trying to get at her for not actually saying anything, the state have proven she actually did. But the main takeaway is it's so contradictory where Susan's concerned about whether she was telling the truth or not. We just don't know. I'm finding it really hard to, believe what Susan told people, and to put on top of that she's vindictive, she's manipulative, she's controlling. I don't know. So I'll be back with the next witness in the next video. So until then, bye for now.